With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
This is James O'Neill. Iran warned it would strike Israeli territory and U.S. military bases if Washington attacks the country, as nationwide protests challenged the Islamic Republic amid economic collapse and soaring inflation. The warning followed statements by President Trump saying the United States was ready to help if Iranian authorities violently suppressed protesters. Iranian leaders rejected the remarks as a miscalculation, vowing harsh crackdowns. Rights groups report at least 116 deaths since protests began in late December, including security personnel. Authorities imposed a near-total internet blackout, raising fears of a bloody repression similar to past crackdowns. Protesters have increasingly called for an end to clerical rule, encouraged by exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. A Ukrainian drone attack on the Russian city of Voronezh killed one woman and wounded 3 others, regional officials said Sunday. The victim died in intensive care after debris from a drone struck a house. Authorities said air defenses intercepted 17 drones, but more than 10 apartment buildings, private homes, and a high school were damaged. The strike followed a massive Russian assault on Ukraine involving hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles that killed at least 4 people in Kyiv. Russia also used a new nuclear-capable hypersonic Oroshnik missile as talks continued on future security guarantees tied to a possible U.S.-led peace deal. Spain's socialist government argued that the European Union needs its own army to reduce dependence on the United States for defense. Foreign Minister José Manuel Albares said recent events, including the U.S. role in Venezuela and disputes over Greenland, show President Trump is seeking to reshape the international order. Albares said Europe must rely on its own strength and build a European army, though he downplayed claims that U.S. threats over Greenland would fracture NATO. The idea has gained traction across the EU, with leaders such as Ursula von der Leyen and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky calling for a European defense force to deter Russia and reduce reliance on Washington. Former MI6 head Sir Richard Dearlove said that it would strengthen European security if the United States gained control of Greenland, arguing only America has the military capacity to defend the Arctic territory and deter Russia and China. While European leaders have reacted angrily to suggestions the U.S. might acquire the island, Dearlove proposed Denmark lease Greenland to Washington long term. He said U.S. control would secure the Arctic, protect key naval choke points, and keep China out. The debate reflects broader concerns in Washington about Europe's ability to defend strategic regions after years of underinvestment in defense. An anti-Iranian regime protester briefly replaced Iran's current flag at its London embassy with the pre-1979 lion and sun flag during a demonstration near Hyde Park. The act drew cheers from hundreds protesting in support of democratic change in Iran's exiled opposition. London police deployed extra officers, arrested 2 people for aggravated trespass and related offenses, and sought another suspect. The protest followed weeks of nationwide unrest in Iran sparked by economic pressures and escalating into calls to end the Islamic Republic. Rights groups report at least 51 deaths, including children, amid an internet shutdown. Elon Musk accused the UK government of suppressing free speech after regulators threatened to block Grok, the AI chatbot on his X platform, over reports it can generate non-consensual sexualized deepfake images of women and children. Ofcom is investigating the chatbot's image generation features, and Technology Secretary Liz Kendall said that she would support a nationwide ban if warranted. Musk responded that similar content can be generated by other AI tools, arguing Grok is being singled out. X has since limited Grok's image tools to paying users and warned illegal content will face legal consequences. This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
There is a problem with medicine, and we can explain what it is by looking back to the discovery of penicillin. Penicillin, it turns out, was not just an accidental finding. Alexander Fleming discovered that mold he found in a culture dish was killing bacteria, but it took over 10 years before a team at Oxford University were able to isolate the active ingredient. They produced small quantities for preclinical and clinical trials, helping prove the compound was safe and could beat infection. However, they couldn't produce it at scale. In 1941, Andrew Jackson Moyer of the US Department of Agriculture, the forerunner to the FDA, suggested changes to the manufacturing process, enabling mass production. It turns out medicines are not invented when someone discovers a new molecular entity. They are the product of key stakeholders working together collaboratively. Until medicine can be manufactured at scale, it may as well not exist. And in 2025, this is a problem. In the 1980s, pharmaceutical companies began outsourcing production. Suddenly the system was significantly less integrated. Someone with a new discovery today will find themselves disconnected from the rest of the development and manufacturing process. Companies that develop medicine are still happy to work with big established pharma companies, but the modern day Flemings are cut out of the system. The result is far fewer new medicines coming to market. We want to fix this by ensuring the pharma industry builds a more integrated supply chain. We also believe that doctors' expertise administering medicine should be included at the beginning of the process. We know that doctors on the front line have insights about how to repurpose medicine. Doctors should be able to report their findings so that the necessary testing can be completed and they can share the results worldwide. Learn more here and help us take medicines back to the future.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome to the Protagonists. It's a Monday. Nice to have your company too. It's a good evening for those in Australia, and a very good morning for those in the UK and Europe. And for Joachim, it's probably almost lunchtime. So thank you very much for our guest very shortly, talking about Iran. Now, there has been an apparent escalation. In fact, there has been an escalation of unrest and arrest across Iran. However, reports of hundreds, if not thousands of deaths and over 10,000 arrests are impossible to verify. We do believe it though, but they're very hard to verify as Iranian authorities shut down the internet, a move unsettling to many in the West. Amidst the uncertainty, President Trump warns of strong options he can take, including the use of Starlink to bypass blackouts and possibly military intervention. Senator Lindsay Graham, aka Rambo, meanwhile urges the killing of regime leaders. Hardly a sane intervention, but if you look at the history of the US, something that has been going on for quite some time. Iran has threatened US bases and now wants to talk to the US. Could this signify the regime is in trouble? One thing is clear, that 2026 has commenced badly, and the US administration, egged on by deep state and Lindsay Graham, are destabilising an already fragile environment. This does not bode well for peace talks in Ukraine or hopes that Trump can use his formidable negotiation skills to work peacefully with China and Russia. Perhaps, as some commentators suggest, the financial situation facing the US is worse than any have admitted, and the US must do all it can to maintain some control, and war does mean peace. We'll talk about that in a second. It's a contradiction, isn't it? Joachim Hagopian is an independent journalist, and Adel Darwish is a British commentator and author. Thank you very much for joining us. I just want to, by the way, we do have another guest we hope will be on fairly shortly. We're just trying to do a connection at the moment. Joachim and Adel, thank you for joining us. Joachim, what's your impressions at the moment of what's happening in in Iran and what Trump might do?
Yeah, this is just more of the same old playbook, divide and rule. You create the enemy, and then you go about using propaganda to make the U.S. Israel cause uh, more affirmed in the minds of everybody that the U.S. is the winner, along with Israel. They go together. They're criminal governments that go together, bringing terrorism around the world. Now, it's been a long time. 1979, they did the revolution, the Islamic Revolution, and ever since they've been going for regime change in Iran, just as they, have been trying to, make enemies along the border of Russia and China to do the weakening there within, to then bring about regime change in the big boys, Russia and China, which they haven't been successful at all, as hard as they try. Well, Iran now is being a focus here for Israel primarily, obviously, because obviously Iran is the biggest rival in the Middle East to the Israel power. And Israel's, feeling their oats, having made some gains with Syria. Now they're in Syria, and they kind of held Hezbollah in check now in southern Lebanon. So they're feeling their oats. They're like, okay, Greater Israel Project, here we come. And then, of course, Trump's feeling his oats from his little fiasco in Venezuela. So they got big heads right now, believing that they have a real shot at bringing down Iran, which they've been gunning for a long, long time. So, in other words, what I'm saying is this is all not completely. I mean, there is some legitimacy to the inflation rates in Iran, and that there are some, they went up by 40% or something like that last year in December, which is only a few weeks ago. So there is some economic instability, but they're preying on that, the evil ones of the governments of Israel and America, to basically do a regime change. It's all over again. They did the regime change quote in Nicaragua a week or so ago. Well, now they're working on Iran, and next week they'll be going against Russia, and then of course, China's been waiting, with the whole Taiwan situation. So yeah, it's just war. As the U.S. economy drops and sinks down, they make war. That's the history of the nation. 92% of the time in existence of the 250 years now, America's been killing people on some foreign soil. So here we go again.
Yeah, I do. I agree. I think, and I think Adel would also agree at the moment that Trump is very. All the things that Adel said about Trump coming true, which I can't stand. Adel, congratulations for being a fortune teller. What's your impressions at the moment of what's happening in Iran? Understanding that it's very hard to get information out of Iran, but we do, with intel from various countries, good and bad, we do understand what is happening. What's your ideas? What's your thoughts? You probably need to turn your microphone on just at the moment. Just that little button says on and off.
My microphone. Apology. Is it all right now?
Very good, very good. So what's your thoughts?
Okay, good morning to all. Or good evening your time. What I've been thinking on Iran, I've been thinking on three circles or three levels. What's happening in Iran, inside Iran itself, within the forces of Iran, different. The hierarchy power structure of the Islamic Republic, the economic problem, the people themselves being fed up of this oppression. It's one of the most fascist and oppressive regimes in the world. That's inside Iran. Also, you have it just started as economic problems, and then now it's just after Christmas, now going on for 2 weeks, and looks more like a revolt rather than just protest. And obviously within this equation are the Iranian exiles who are in the region and in Europe, and specifically in America. The second circle, we have the geopolitics of the region itself. Iran is also connected with the Russia, with China, but more or less there's a rivalry on the other side of the Gulf, the Arab side, probably with the exception of Qatar, which is sort of a good contact with Iran and with all these radical revolutionary forces, some even terrorist groups there connecting through Qatar. That's the exception. But the rest of the Gulf region also want to actually to see that regime gone, although they don't say it vocally. We have seen confrontation in Yemen between sort of the Saudi Arabian, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, Israelis, and Iran supporting part of it. Also important in the region, Israel, after the October 7, 2023, Israel seemed to be winning so far against Iran. They have managed to neutralize Hamas, no longer an existential threat. It's an Iranian force. They have weakened Hezbollah. The Assad regime has actually fallen. So Iran's proxies and supporters in the region have also fallen and weakened. Now, in the geopolitics of the world, Joachim been talking about the American role and the Americans' errors and mistakes and so on. Ironically, this time the Americans are quite hesitant. I don't think they probably know what they wanted to do. On one hand, if they interfere and try to decapitate the regime or try some kind of airstrikes, that might have actually adverse effect. That might turn large sections of the population against the Americans, so they don't want to interfere. But again, the regime itself is very strong, very powerful, unlike the Shah's time. Shah's time, in February 1979, because I remember covering this story then, was a younger journalist, how the army and the police refused, joined the demonstrations and refused to actually shoot at their own people. This is not happening this time. Even if the army and the police were reluctant, then we have the Prestige, the Revolutionary Guards, and being pressured here to describe it as a terrorist group. So they are very powerful, very strong and armed within the army. And that is actually the dilemma for the United States and for Europe and for the powers that are supposed to be helping the Iranian people.
Well, Kim, by the way, you can always, both of you can jump in if you would like to disagree, because you both have enormous, I think, knowledge of global events. However, do you think this, it disturbs me that Donald Trump, and again, he's not the favourite president of many, many people globally, but it does disturb me that Trump's answer to peace is more force, which would seem a contradiction in itself. Joachim, where does this, if the US does decide to, and I can't see how they can because you've got so many Iranians out there protesting, so unless they hit a military target, the chances are they may have collateral damage, and that being those innocent protesters. I can't see the US being able to do what they would like to do, what they're saying to do, but I can see what Iran would like to do, and Iran have said that they will light up Israel and also US military bases, which is a direct threat. What should Trump do?
Keep his nose out of foreign affairs, which is an impossibility for him. You know, he's basically controlled by the oligarchs that run the world. So of course, their thing, they function on war, you know, and the same old divide and rule, always making enemies, always making war. So that's what he represents, you know, the city of London, you know, money changers. And therefore he does what he's told. And yeah, he gets elected by saying, yeah, I didn't bring a war in my first term and I'm the peacetime president. You know, that's my legacy. You know, I mean, everything that comes out of his mouth a week or so later, he completely shows himself to be a liar. You know, so you can't believe anything the guy says. This is basically U.S. and Israel. They hire mercenaries inside Iran to riot. They're paid mercenaries for rioting. burning buildings and cars and killing security forces. They've done their share. This is all an Israel and US project. Now, as I alluded to earlier, yes, there is some economic deficiencies with the economy in Iran. Hey, they've been sanctioned forever. That has hurt. But yeah, this is just one more active regime change uh, area they've been working on for a long time, because they got what? Reza Pahlavi, the Shah's son. He goes to Israel in 2023 and he kisses their ass. Oops, the Wailing Wall he kissed. I mean, he's in the Israel pocket. And they're using him. They use the diaspora of the Iranian population around the world, who are predominantly against the Islamic State of Iran. So they got a lot of wealth and backing from Israel, the diaspora, Iran, and of course America, and that's what this mostly is. I believe that yes, the internal structure in Iran does want to shut it down so that they don't get the idea, the world doesn't get the idea that the government is unstable. I think beyond the what we see and hear, Iranians are pretty much united because they are realizing that Israel and America have been, Iran's been in the crosshairs of Israel and America for a long time, and that they see that the inciting rioters are paid by other foreign entities. So I don't think that this is any kind of major internal revolt against the government. I don't see that. I think the public of Iran is aware of the agenda, and I don't believe it's going to get out of hand where there will be a regime change in Iran. I don't believe that.
Adel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we are a little bit in danger here of simplifying a very complex situation inside Iran. I probably would beg to differ on the issue that Iranians are united. Maybe the regime itself and the hardcore ideological Islamist regime is united. There are forces in the region. I've been speaking to people actually in Egypt and in Iraq and in the Gulf, and they still have within the genetic sort of structure, like social structure of Muslims and Arabs, to hate the Jews are anti-Israel and Americans. So it's not actually that simple. I mean, the Americans, of course, they know the lesson of the Iraq and the toppling of Saddam Hussein regime when they relied only on people like Ahmed Shalabi and people who were the diaspora, as Joachim called them, in exile. So they learned this lesson. But when Saddam was falling, the Americans had Iraqi generals on their payroll. They might have some in the army, but I don't think actually they have anybody in the Revolutionary Guards. That's actually one important issue. And the second one is, if you talk about external intervention, yes, the Shia armed groups from Iraq who work for the Iranians are actually going there now and been going there in the last 2 weeks to actually help shoot at the demonstrators and so on. Whether they are infiltrators sent by Israel and by America, I'm not quite sure about if we have evidence of that. However, they will be very, very limited. They can't be in all the provinces and all the cities in Iran. And if I were in the Israeli shoes, with actually any human assets there, like agents or spies, I would keep them to do something in my interest, in the interest of Israel, rather than using them like this openly, and because there are only limited number of people you can use. So we must not go down this conspiracy route. We must actually think of much bigger. Now, if that type of regime, they're under economic pressure and in talks with the Americans, now we want to talk to President Trump, would actually satisfy President Trump sort of hunger and thirst for oil and for acquiring and making America great again by projecting power and so on. So they can make a deal with them, lifting some sanction, giving them some carrots in exchange of opening up, improving human rights. And so again, I doubt that very much. Because I don't think the Americans have a blueprint for what really they want to do apart from this bad regime should go. And I don't think the regime can be actually trusted of the kind of reform that actually presents some kind of representation, some kind of democracy, some kind of human rights. So these conditions of reaching this kind of deal that would benefit the ordinary Iranian, I don't think we have the essential elements to reach this equation.
Could I just ask you, Joachim, if Iran, because they are a repressive regime, and do like to rattle the saber, but to what extent we'll soon find out. But if they did, as the Ayatollah has said, we will light up Israel and the US military bases. How do you think this will go? Which way? Because while you have protesters protesting, you really can't bomb a whole lot of cities unless they're military bases, because you're going to kill innocent people. So what do they do? I mean, it's a quandary, because we know that Trump really has a propensity to exert his force. I mean, now that he's kidnapped a leader of a country, he's, besides threatening Europe with Greenland and Mexico because the tequila is too expensive, or things like that. I mean, he's getting a bit of a taste for this, this ruler of the universe. But what happens? I mean, because the Iranians could very well attack Israel and also attack US military bases, understanding full well that they have on their side the protesters out in the streets.
Well, I think it's important to understand the history of Iran and that they have not been an aggressor invading other countries. Who's been the aggressor? Israel and America, not Iran. They react defensively every time, and they've been open to having talks to resolve conflicts with America. But what does America and Trump do? He stabs them in the back, just like he's done with Putin a number of times with Ukraine. So that's the bottom line here, is that Iran wants to work with other countries to resolve conflicts. The only negative that I can say is, yes, to some extent, they have been over the top in their Islamic slam down on any kind of dissent. They have a history of that. But the West preys on that to build it all out of proportion. And that I believe that their population is largely behind the government. Yes, there is probably a little bit, of that Islamic extremism that a lot of the population isn't for, but they have the reformer Pezeshkian in there. I think that's been to try and resolve that tension, and he's trying to work with America and other countries. But so this whole threat, and the Ayatollah, yes, he comes out with these threat statements. However, it's not going to be the initial bombing of Iran that's going to do this. It's always in defense. It's in defense. And so, yes, they're using that rhetoric as a deterrent to prevent, or at least get America and Israel to back off with trying to push the regime change. And yes, if Trump is idiotic enough, foolish enough to send troops in there, which he promised. He promised, hey, you rioters, keep it up there, and yeah, we're going to help you out with the human rights. Human rights, yeah, right. So, if Trump puts a move militarily on Iran, yes, then Iran will strike military U.S. installations throughout the region. And yes, they will go after Israel. I regret that Iran didn't finish the job, what, in June? That was a 12-day war. Israel got its ass kicked. And Netanyahu went begging for Trump to resolve it so he could take credit and try and get his Nobel Peace Prize. It was all propaganda. And that, so-called attack, unprovoked attack by both Israel and United States, it did not deter the development of nuclear weapons in Iran. It only resolved them to make sure that they continue developing, getting the uranium upgrade for nuclear weapons in self-defense. I emphasize.
Adel, what's your thoughts? Because I could see your left or right eye, or both eyes, at one stage were twitching. And
Well,
quite
I'm slightly more concerned, again, probably repeating myself here. If we simplify it like Iran versus America and its ally in the region, Israel, I think it's a little bit oversimplification, and we're ignoring the Iranian people. The large section of the Iranian people, with every province in Iran, and we know there is different demographic structure, different ethnics, and different thoughts among the administrators, but are united on two things: the economic situation and reform, and getting rid of the Ayatollah's structure, Ayatollah's rule. That's number one. Not to ignore the Iranian people. Number two, it's not only Israel in the region that is afraid and worried. Joachim suggesting that intervention is only putting boots on the ground or invading other countries. Well, it isn't. Well, I mean, Iran very, very, very much a control of southern Iraq, or the terrorism that was going there in the past decade or so was supplied by Iran. Hezbollah, who's been arming Hezbollah. Hamas, who's been arming Hamas, etc. And in Yemen, there's a very, very major route there, and the attack on shipping, which is affecting Suez Canal, affecting Egypt, affecting Saudi Arabia, affecting Europe, and so on. So you don't have only to put boots on the ground to be intervening in other countries. So the Iranian intervention is actually well documented, and it actually predates the Islamic Revolution. And speaking of the Islamic Revolution, again, there was a lesson here. We started calling it Islamic Revolution. It isn't. I covered that story from 1977 onwards. It wasn't the Islamic Revolution. It was a revolution hijacked by the mullahs and by Islamists when Khomeini returned from exile. And then we even accepted it called Islamic Revolution. So again, would history repeat itself? That's why we have to be very careful of external intervention. If the Americans intervene in the wrong way, or Israeli intervene in the wrong way, then again, revolution would happen, but then it could be the Islamists, or even a force worse than the Islamists might actually take over. Finally, on this sort of idea of that's only America and Israel there, that might give the Iranians an idea, that's what I'm fearing. They stage some kind of limited attack on Israel, hoping that Israel or America would retaliate, therefore weaken the demonstrations and weaken the protests there, and people will go home and say, oh, we're fighting an external enemy. So that's quite a danger here, that more lives will be lost through ventures by the Ayatollahs in trying to drag Israel into some kind of confrontation, which would be very, very dangerous situation for the region.
Can I ask you, Joachim, maybe the Americans need to move in for regime change, do it properly. They didn't do it very well with, sure, they kidnapped a leader of a particular country in Venezuela, but it's still, for what we can gather in all reports, is still pretty corrupt. So perhaps the Americans need to, if they're going to do it properly and move into Iran, Tehran, and if they're going to do it properly, because this can escalate, can't it? It can get really out of hand. And as Adel said, if they were to attack, just a limited attack on Israel, Israel will go in hammer and tong, and then all of a sudden, do they take the peace, prize back off Trump? Because you're going to have this massive stoush, and it could escalate because at the moment we see Trump and other politicians, they think they can control war. You can't control war. War has its own mind. It'll go where it wants to go. So how do we? Because you can't deny that the regime, Joachim, in Iran is very repressive, and in fact will become even more repressive now that the people have decided they're going to get out there and protest. 2,000 plus protesters, peaceful protesters, have been killed, according to reports. So what do you think? Should they move in and remove the regime and perhaps give them some sort of sanction that they can live forever in safety? But in the meantime, what they've done is they've skedoodled out of Iran, and you have then another regime. And just a part two on that one, if you have another regime, I mean, it's a toss-up of the coin whether they're going to be better than the last lot or worse.
Name me one regime change operation that America did and it was better for the country. There isn't any. There isn't any. Every regime change operation America's been part of has worsened the country. Look at Libya. Look at Syria. Look at Iraq. They've been struggling forever. Afghanistan, on and on. Every nation that U.S. and Israel, because they're always together, especially when it comes to the Middle East, they don't improve. In other words, yes, every government has a certain degree of corruption and trouble. There is no government that is absolutely for the people. I've been saying this a long time, that pretty much all the governments are so corrupt now that we're in deep shit all over the world because of the corruption and the wayward kind of thinking that's behind the puppets that are in the government, because they are controlled. I make a big thing that the control mechanism for war and for all the geopolitics conflicts are created by the money changing City of London, Rothschild, Rockefeller, all the dynasty bloodlines. They've been in control a long time, and they're going towards this technocracy now where they have the digital ID going, and pretty soon they're going to insist that we get the kill shots that have killed millions around the world. So that's where we're headed. The controllers of this earth have wanted one world government for over a century. They were called internationalists a century ago. Well, they're going more gusto now than ever before, as our freedoms get completely usurped by the one world government agenda. And they also have a depopulation agenda going right now as well. So, that's why I appeal to the people of the world to stand up, get with it as far as understanding the stakes that we are up against for our own survival as a human species.
Can I ask you, Adel, what would it take for a regime change, and to comment on what Joachim has been saying?
Well, I probably agree with Joachim on that. The history of regime change has not been very sort of successful so far, and I think because that regime change was not sort of planned from within. I mean, you can't plan a revolution. You can plan military coup, yes, but you can't plan a revolution. So when these repressive regimes like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein I've seen before fallen, all hell breaks loose. It's because there was no civil society, there were no organizations built there to take over with no parties, no democracy, and so on. So again, do the Americans actually are in contacts inside Iran for army generals or at least army colonels to take over? I don't know. I don't think they actually have uh, this idea. So perhaps as going back to the idea of putting some kind of economic pressure more on the Ayatollah while talking to them at the same time, any way they can actually be reformed in a way that satisfy the Iranians inside Iran. Problem with this uprising, there's no leadership. It's actually that, as I said, you can't plan a revolution; it just happened there. And unlike revolutions we studied in history, and we've always been looking back into the French Revolution, that there's no even intellectual body there that they had presented some kind of way forward. And what do we want? Yes, we want freedom, but how you go about it? There is no body intellectual there in Iran to speak to. So perhaps again, so far to avoid bloodshed, if the Americans accept these talks from the Iranians and show them that if they can stop killing people, if they reform in a way halfway through and wait. I mean, personally, I think once Ayatollah Khamenei dies, probably would see something else that might actually emerge out of it. But this is not showing any sign of dying yet. To be honest, I'm not very sort of optimistic about it, and just hoping that some kind of power within the power structure inside Iran lead to some kind of dialogue with the representatives from the people themselves and slightly from within. You become gradually trying to improve the conditions inside Iran.
Well, Kim, what do you think the role of the CIA and Mossad has been in the recent uprisings?
Well, if you want to really get to the bottom of why the problems in Iran are going on with protests, all you need to do is look at Mossad and CIA, because they are the deliverers of the unrest by paid mercenary rioting. That's their agenda. That's what they do. As quote intel services, they make trouble in all the countries that they have on in the crosshairs for regime changes. I.e., if you line up in support of your own people, or and by necessity aligning with Russia and China and Iran, you're in the crosshairs of America, and therefore you have CIA and Mossad after you. This is the reality of the world. So yeah, they played a huge part. Uh, they were trying to get the Starlink terminals in there so that they could keep showing all the bloodshed and all of this, and make mileage out of that for propaganda around the world. Um, you know, uh, because yeah, they shut down the internet. Yeah, so yeah, there's internal strife going on to some extent. Yes, in Iran, and the economy has been struggling, largely due to a lot of the sanctions, the economic sanctions. What right does America have to unilaterally just decide, okay, you're a bad guy, we're going to sanction you and make your life hard? And this is what happens. That's why they always go to Russia and China for help. And the multilateral, multipolar world now with the BRICS alliance, that's kicking the ass of all the Western countries with the US and their vassals of Europe. They're going down. The Eastern nations are rising, and militarily, politically, in every way. And I'm not a fan of oppression, and China's full of that, and Russia's got its share of that too. You say anything against the state, they'll take you away. So I'm not in favor of Russia, China, and Iran, because they are very oppressive in that way. But why are they having to, try and establish some kind of consensus amongst the countries of the world just to be able to survive in a world where the oppressor is the United States, Europe, the West, and Israel. It's their world. They've had it a long time, and they blew it. Now their economies are shuttering, and they have to have a war now. They called it the Great Reset. Remember the King and the World Economic Forum. Yeah, it's their Great Reset. It's called global depression and collapse of the economy, and that's what's coming along with World War III.
I think we're
Adel,
talking about something else here.
yeah, further that, Adel, keep going. Your
No, I
thoughts.
think I was talking something else here. I mean, the new sort of, which he's calling it, the Monroe doctrine, like Monroe doctrine, expanding the 19th century and then 20th century um, hemisphere sort of influence, leaving China and Russia in Asia, and he controlled the Western Hemisphere. I don't think Iran is part of his calculation in this world view of reset, as Joachim says. But again, we are falling again into the trap of paid agents and CIA and Israeli Mossad and so on. You can't do that. You cannot do that physically in all the 30 odd provinces of Iran. All of them were actually uprising. We're ignoring a very strong feminist movement. Look at actually the protests there. Women have actually been in the forefront in both 2000, 3 times actually, but this time that's much stronger women in the front and beating women shot in the head. So it's this strong feminist movement there, showing that the middle classes and the people who are actually got more sort of long-term intellectual organization in their thinking are very much part of this protest. And I'm a little bit surprised by Joachim actually playing down the reasons for the uprising, which is the economic factor, the economy, because the Iranian Islamic regime has been actually living on the legacy that was left over from the prosperous year before the 1979 revolution. So there's not much more mileage left. And even now, look at the oil prices. Oil prices have not gone up, despite Iran being sort of a major oil producer. What does it tell us? Tell us that there's a lot of oil around the world. So again, they lost a card there they can actually play. So what's left is a negotiation with America. And unfortunately, actually, the media, whether being divided between right and left, and sort of the anti-American media is much sort of more number, overlooking the internal reasons for this revolt. Or media also cannot send people there in Iran because it's not easy to get accreditation, and also the safety, because people with dual nationalities and Westerners, especially from Europe, specifically from Britain and America, gets actually arrested, kidnapped by the Revolutionary Guard and taken and being treated as a spies and so on. So we have to actually be a little bit humble ourselves and say we don't know enough, because even our colleagues in the media who have got more sort of resources to cover the story cannot cover it properly. So we mustn't actually say, oh, it is America, Trump, and Israel. Let's Iran. It isn't. It is not. It is an Iranian issue. Yes, it's got regional, it's got global, but it's a very, very much Iranian issue. This is the mistake actually we made in the Foreign Office and CIA made back in the last 2 years of the Shah. They ignored all the internal trends and internal faction there who were very unhappy about the regime inside Iran during the last time. So repeating this mistake again is not going to make us understand the situation. And I'm just sick of the word understand, because we are totally powerless in pulling any levers that might lead to change in Iran.
Well, Kim, can you just tell me why the US keeps pursuing sanctions? They just don't work, do they?
They have not. They have weakened. I mean, Cuba has been sanctioned forever. going back to the Castro days. Uh, to some extent, they actually have worked in the sense that they have made internal economic problems for those countries. Uh, but largely, as far as regime change, using economic sanctions for regime change and significantly weakening countries like Russia and China, and they've all been under a huge amount of sanctions. It keeps going up and up and up. Uh, and they haven't worked for the big boys, Russia, China. They could be working for Iran, though, as far as, for America's purpose, regime. And they've created some economic deficiencies in that country now. I do think so. So, to some extent, they destabilize Iran, So, yeah, I mean, in one sense, I think they have worked. But for Russia and China, they have not worked. I don't believe at all. They're
Well,
big enough countries where they can sustain whatever the sanctions and work around it. I mean, the Russian. Well, look at the situation right now with the oil tanker that's flying a Russian flag that the U.S. Coast Guard and the military, hijacked basically, took over, and this is not going well. This is not going to end well either. If the U.S. continues to do that, uh, they're only riling up the Russian bear. And if you go head to head with Russia militarily, the West is going to lose unless it goes nuclear. And that's another big problem with Israel. They have that Samson option. And if they see their country going down, they will not hesitate to use nuclear weapons and really cause major problems for every single living organism on the planet. But that's how sick the government of Israel is, that if they see themselves disappearing off the earth, they're going to want to take the whole earth with them. That's how sick they are.
it's interesting, just as a quick sidebar there, Your Honour. Interesting that in Australia, for example, by you and also overseas, other countries, by criticising the Israeli government, which is a right of everybody, they're trying to bring in laws, especially in this country, that it is anti-Semitic to criticise a particular government, such as Israel. And that's absolutely wrong, isn't it, Adel? I mean, to have an attack on verbally or thought-wise or whatever with a government doesn't mean that you're against the people. It's just that you're against that particular government. And it doesn't mean that we're anti-Semitic. But so, because I'm just thinking, I don't want to get a knock on the door here. People are saying that the police roll up and say you are anti-Semitic because you're criticising the Israeli government. Nothing to do with that. But it's interesting how they twist things around, isn't it, Adel, to make sure that they can stifle free speech, which is an important part of any democracy. I find that the idea, and it's both legacy media and also independent media, that if you have a different opinion, then they don't want you to express that. But they still all believe in free speech. Free speech is having a say whether you agree with that person or not, and accepting that. And you don't have to agree with that person, but they have that right to have their own opinion. And I think this brings in the reporting of stoushes in the Middle East, with Iran, for example. And we have the Israeli factor there that people would be saying, as Joachim said, that the Israeli government is a very bad government. That's his opinion, and that's my opinion. Well, we don't think that the Israeli people are bad people. We think that the government it just stinks. Same as with the Iranian government. We don't think that the Iranians are bad people. We just think that that regime stinks. To bring peace, though, you need to have trust in each other. And if you have the person such as Donald Trump suggesting that he can broker a peace deal, trust me, if you look at what he's doing at the moment, Venezuela, Cuba, Mexico, what else? I've lived out in another countries somewhere along the line. Greenland,
Panama.
that's right. I think you are. So, Adel, you would have to agree, though, that the idea of peace brokered by a person who has a record of being a habitual liar is a problem for that very process called peace, isn't it?
Yeah, so many so many ideas you've thrown there. Very quickly on the media, free speech and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. We having been going through Parliament now the redefinition of Islamophobia and, and anti-Semitism and so on. This is quite a dangerous route when you legalize, because that means you are actually reintroducing the blasphemy laws by the back door. So it's a very dangerous moment for free speech and and for the media to report freely. On the peacemaking, yeah, Trump sort of optimizes. I mean, I was still a reporter when Reagan came to power, and so this actor coming gun ho and so on. Then we're faced with Trump, which is much worse. Trump sort of optimizes this kind of not only the cowboy mentality, the problem that America has, unlike the European colonial powers. The Europeans, specifically Britain, France, and specifically Britain, had a long history of colonialism. So the army that would actually do the war is not the administration that would introduce legal system and law and so on. The Americans don't have this experience. They did not want to admit to themselves they were an empire, because imperialism is a bad word in history. Because they were colonies themselves of the European powers, specifically Britain. And the Monroe Doctrine was specifically to stop European influence in Latin America, specifically the British Empire. So the lack of this history of how peace would work after a regime would fall, the Americans do not have this experience, never ever had it, never had a colony in order to have this experience. And not only this lack of experience institutions that are there, when you get a president in the White House who overrides the other institutions with a long history and think tanks and who have some plans and reports and so on, overrides and shut them up, well, he cannot really make peace.
Joachim, where to now? What do we do? How do we? What's the landscape looking like at the moment? Because it is a tinderbox at the moment, and you have the negotiated President Peace, and truly he can't be trusted, and that's a terrible thing to say about somebody that many put a lot of faith into before he was elected as president of the US. And that seems to have been discarded. It's not just my opinion; it's many opinions, not just with Iran, but you mentioned all the other countries. I mean, who would ever think you could have a stoush between the US and Europe, and that could possibly happen unless he pays them an enormous amount of money. But I don't see that happening because I don't think Denmark's all that keen. So, where do you see the landscape? How do you see, say, the next couple of weeks? And it's very hard to, I know it's a difficult question for you because things are changing, minute by minute or hour by hour. But what's your gut feeling on how the landscape will be, understanding that the person trying to create peace, as I said before, is becoming a habitual liar?
Yeah, it's become a major problem now. I want to add one more piece, though, to what was already said. You can criticize America, you can criticize Russia or China, any country on earth, but the one country you can't criticize and not risk being in prison, Israel. What does that say? I think it says a whole lot about this world. Regarding where to go, it seems like there's bad actors in all the major countries of the West. I have to say, Keir Starmer's a joke. He's a horror show, and the British people know this. He's got the lowest, I think, rating of all the prime ministers and presidents on earth. He's one of the very lowest. Merz from Germany, same deal. Macron, he's on his last leg there. Somehow he's managed to survive all this long. I mean, every country has a puppet leader that's globalist, that's totally, being taken orders from City of London. So as long as you have this, and using the divide and rule against the Eastern powers for war, the people have to mobilize as one human species for peace and diplomacy, which they never do. You never hear any governments, basically, especially in the West, talking about diplomacy and peace, ways to find resolution to conflict. You never hear them talk about that because they take orders straight from the City of London that wants war. So it's a big problem that the people of this world need to mobilize and try and solve. I don't think it's going to come from government action that's going to resolve the problems we're facing.
It's interesting, isn't it, Adel? And I'd like you to get your views on the landscape, how you see it in the next few weeks. And again, as I mentioned to Joachim, with the situation changing very, very regularly, it's hard to do that. But it's interesting that those calling for peace, such as Donald Trump, and you look throughout Europe, and we call for peace, but we do it by force. And if it means we go to war to achieve peace, it becomes a contradiction in itself. A lot of the headaches would be almost hemorrhaging time, because we have, again, the president organising or trying to broker peace. He's, especially look at the last few weeks, he has become almost on the international stage, whether it's a habitual liar or a president that is hell bent on being, I always say it as half tongue in cheek, but the tongue is moving out of the cheek. He wants to become the president of the entire galaxy or universe, and it doesn't augur well, in my opinion, for peace in the Middle East, and I see it escalating. That's how I see it. How do you see the landscape?
Well, two things. If we speak about Iran specifically, I think unless it can go on for a while, it can end tragically, like what happened in China in 1989, the Tiananmen Square massacre, or perhaps if sections of the army and stronger institutions there start actually refusing to follow order. Not saying joining the demonstrators, but at least to speak to the other branches of the executive there in Iran, saying, time to reform now and give in, hold an election, give in to the demonstrator demands and so on. That's actually one scenario which we hope will go that way. The other scenario, of course, it can lead to some kind of a war, civil war inside. Not quite civil war, but war between the factions, between the hardcore revolutionary guards and an army section of the army, side to side with the people. The third option, of course, is will the talk between the regime in Iran and the American administration yield anything positive? As you said, I think there's a confusion in the administration, Trump's administration head, between peace and absence of war. And I think the absence of a live conflict is different from peace. I think that what they meant by peace in their head is the absence of a live conflict. And Europe and the world are focusing now on the sort of North Atlantic and Greenland and what's going to come out of it. And they might sort of take their eyes off Iran. And the scenario I talked about before, if the Iran decide to engage Israel, hit the American bases, God help us, because that would be the end of the dreams of the people who have been demonstrating peacefully and want to change in Iran.
Just one final one. Somebody wrote in and said, and I'll stay with you, Adel, here just quickly. Who will be if they have that regime change, which seems quite likely, in my opinion, who will be the new leader for Iran? Will it be the Crown Prince? Will it be who? Who do you think?
I think the best choice would have been some kind of an interim government there. Don't forget, you have the army, you have the we didn't speak about the structure of power in Iraq, which you get the supreme leader who overrides everything, and you get the government, you get the president, but also you get the council of experts. Those council of experts obviously overruled by the Islamic ideas, but there are quite few experts there who might even be some kind of a middle ground choice, perhaps acceptable to it. But again, the Ayatollah believe that he actually is a messenger of God or sent by God or somehow that if you can just become a spiritual leader, this kind of a solution, then you can have an interim government, then you have election. If the royalists with the Prince Reza, the son of the Shah, wants to come in, by all means, he can have his own party and see what people actually will do there, if they want to remain a republic or not. But at least you need some kind of an interim. And we're talking about years here, not talking about a couple of months as they tried to do in Iraq before they didn't succeed.
And Joachim, just finally, who do you think will be the next leader of Iran?
It's hard to say. I mean, I don't know enough about the internal politics in Iran to be able to, in any kind of educated way, make even a guess on who's going to rise up and be the best choice. It's probably going to come. I think basically the biggest concern is war. And the biggest concern is the U.S. and Israel are out to basically exploit this dissent in Iran as the pretext for going in there for regime change that will make everything better, when we know by history alone it won't be better. So, I don't know that there's a solution, because I think it's already in the cards that they've already been talking about it even before the riots started in Iran. The Israel and U.S. was talking about, well, we can't let Iran develop all their anti-defense, missile defense. We can't allow that. We can't, and they've been stepping it up. And so, yeah, we better go in there and do something. They were already talking that prior to this whole riot thing going on. So, and we knew when it ended in June, we knew that there would be a round two. We knew it. And so I see it as inevitable that there will be war against Iran committed by the U.S. and Israel. I don't see any way around it with the current scenario at play right now.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Joachim Hagopian, independent journalist, and Adel Darwish, always a pleasure, British commentator and author, and a true gentleman. Thank you so much for being part of the protagonists. I always call it the procrastinators. That's another name for another show, but we'll get around to that one, being a procrastinator. Gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been the Protagonist, and this is The World Today. Thank you so much. We'll catch you again tomorrow here on The World Today.